So we are ready to begin. Thank you again for being here. So hello and welcome to CalStart's Global Commercial Vehicle Drive to Zero press briefing. We wanted to just take a minute at the beginning to acknowledge just the pain many in our communities are feeling right now, and thank you for being with us. We are especially thankful to all journalists right now more than ever, so thank you again for being here. Today we will be unveiling new data analysis compiled from Drive to Zero Zero Emission Technology Inventory. We will begin our discussion with commercial vehicle expert and CalSTART Executive Vice President Bill Van Amberg, who will say a few words about CalSTART. We will then hear from Dr. Cristiano Fassagna, who is Global Director of the Drive to Zero program. Cristiano is a commercial vehicle expert and an engineer. He will give you a brief introduction to the Drive to Zero program and our new Zero Emission Technology Inventory, which we call ZETI. And then we're going to follow up with Ben Mendel, who is Northeast Regional Director for CalSTART and the leader of the ZETI team. And Ben is going to be walking us through our findings today. Following the CalSTART team, we will hear from Steve Molk, who is Project Implementation Manager for Zero Emission Delivery at IKEA Retail US. And then following Steve, we will hear from Aaron Gilmore, who is Vice President, Electric Truck Division North America for BYD Motors. After Mr. Gilmore, we will open up for questions. If folks could please mute during the speaker portion, we would really appreciate it. And with that, we'll turn it over to Bill Van Amberg. Bill.
Thank you, Roxana, and welcome to everybody during these very difficult times in our nation. So many different things that we are facing. One of the things that is exciting, though, is that we're starting to see some breakthroughs in the technologies that really can have transformational impacts on our clean air and climate change and together with jobs. And that is really the role of CalSTART. So I serve as Executive Vice President, as Roxana outlined. And I also lead all of our medium and heavy duty commercial work, both on the on-road side for vehicles and the off-road side for equipment, and the transformation of that technology. CalSTART itself is a clean transportation accelerator or catalyst, if you will, if you're not familiar with us. We have more than 250 members, and we're a very unique nonprofit because we are focused on building an industry that can actually make the products and put them into service that will cause the change that we're trying to seek in terms of clean air in our cities, reducing climate change impacts around the world, and also creating economic opportunity and good paying jobs, the jobs that frankly we believe will be the jobs of the now and the future. We have members that run the gamut from full OEMs on the truck, bus, and car level, and examples would include Volvo, Daimler, GM, Ford, Navistar, and the like, but also a full suite of the innovators and also the key suppliers to that industry. And then most tellingly, I would say, would be the fleets who have to use these vehicles and put them into service, and then fuel providers who will be bringing the new capability into the marketplace. I think as we look at the issues of urban pollution around the world, and particularly with now the overlay of COVID on top of that and the risks from COVID with dirtier air, we really have to be mindful of the need for this change at the same time that we are making changes in reducing our carbon impact. And I think as we consider that the transport sector in general is becoming the biggest growing sector of all of them for climate change, and that the heavy sector is the fastest growing one because of our growth in goods movement, in last mile delivery, in online ordering and shopping, we really need to do this for a variety of reasons, not least of which is for social equity and justice, because most people suffering the dirty air around the world are in our urban regions next to our transport corridors. So that is the goal of CalSTART. We have 7 offices around the United States and then partner offices around the world who we work through our Global Drive to Zero program. And it's that program that has really come up with the analytics and the tools that ZETI represents. And so to explain the Drive to Zero program, I'm really pleased to have our global director of that program, Dr. Cristiano Fassagna, joining us now. Cristiano.
Yeah, no, thank you, Bill. And really great introduction to CalSTART. And also very thankful for you all being here with us today, despite everything that is happening. And talking about Drive to Zero itself, it's a program that was launched in 2018, and it aims to enable and accelerate the growth of zero and near zero commercial vehicles. So our vision is that zero emission trucks and buses are commercially viable and cost effective by 2025 and be the dominant technology by 2040 in leading segments and regions. We believe it's very important to focus on the commercial vehicle space because they represent a slightly small number of vehicles, but they represent a really sizable share of fuel consumption, climate emissions, and air pollution. So it's a very, very effective target for emissions control. And to accomplish this vision that we have, we need 4 steps. So first, we target implementation and deployment in those segments where electrification works today. So those are particularly urban applications. Second, we build supportive ecosystems in leading regions made up of aligned policies, financial incentives, infrastructure investments, and pilot projects. Third, we align these policies and incentives across the leading regions so that we send really strong signal and encourage a global supply chain of components and vehicles. And then finally, we reach economies of scale. As the technology improves, the production volumes increase and costs go down. So at Drive to Zero, we work with pledge partners, such as government, manufacturers and fleets and energy suppliers that have agreed to work together to speed these early markets for zero emission trucks and buses. Amongst our pledge partners are IKEA and BYD here with us, but also other partners, such as the nations of Canada, as well as other leading cities such as New York City, Los Angeles, and Vancouver. So you can visit our website if you want a full list of pledge partners. And if you can go to the next slide, one of the tools that we have developed to speed market success is our Zero Emission Technology Inventory Tool, or ZETI for short. It is a public, online, and interactive tool that tracks the growth of zero-emission commercial vehicles globally as measured by model availability. So it catalogs all the current and upcoming models of zero-emission trucks, buses, and off-road equipment, and really creates a foundation for a much better understanding of this technology segment. So it really provides very granular data by weight class, by payload and passenger capacity, driving range in terms of the number of miles that a vehicle can go on a single charge, and also the energy storage capacity. And the tool also has a cool timeline feature that gives you the ability to see whether that vehicle is available today or it has been announced in a future date. And to this, I'll toss over to my colleague, Ben Mundell, who will talk about some insights on the data that is behind the ZETI tool.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Cristiano. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone today, and want to echo my colleagues in thanking you all for joining us. So it's really my pleasure to share with you the initial findings of what our team has compiled on model availability for zero-emission commercial vehicles through ZETI. Now, at the top, before we dive into the visuals, I just want to note that while we've begun compiling model availability data for multiple first mover global regions, those include China, India, Europe, Latin America, we at CalSTART at this moment have by far the greatest familiarity with and therefore representative data for the United States and Canadian markets. So as a result, the following data visuals include only the US and Canada, though we do intend to publish similar graphics down the line for other regions as we work with partners in those regions to continue populating the listings for those really important global markets. Okay, with that out of the way, let's dive into the data. So what we are finding is that zero-emission trucks and buses are on the verge of a major surge in the US and Canada. The number of available and announced models of zero-emission trucks and buses in the US and Canada is on track to increase nearly 80% from the end of last year to the end of 2020. And that figure from the end of last year is expected to more than double by 2023. So by the end of this year, we expect there to be 169 discrete zero-emission medium and heavy-duty vehicle models in commercial production compared to 95 models at the end of last year. And that figure is expected to jump to 195 by the end of 2023, so a jump of a full 100 vehicle models just in these two countries. Now, the growth we're seeing is happening really across the board, and you can see this here for most vehicle types that are represented in our ZETI inventory. And you'll note the strong uptick in 2020 pretty much across the board in most vehicle segments. So starting with what is available now, you'll notice that the purple segment, transit bus, is really what begins as the leading segment in terms of available vehicle models. And that's consistent with the Drive to Zero beachhead strategy, which indicates that transit buses are the logical first success application for zero-emission technology. And that owes to their short duty cycles, typically in an urban environment, as well as their fixed route service with back-to-base operations, which makes providing adequate charging infrastructure much simpler and more straightforward. However, what really jumps out in this chart is the light green segment, medium-duty trucks. And those, by the end of this year, will have by far the most model availability in the US and Canada, and continue that growth through the end of the time period we're tracking into the mid-2020s. And that's really an artifact of the composition of that market segment. The medium-duty truck space, which consists of things like box trucks and other maybe straight trucks, it consists of a lot of really versatile upfit manufacturers which have battery electric conversion kits that can be offered on many different combinations of body types and vehicle chassis. And therefore, each combination represents one discrete entry within our ZETI tracking inventory. So that's what drives that significant growth we're seeing in medium-duty trucks specifically. I also want to call attention to the heavy-duty truck segment, so that's the kind of royal blue in the second column here. And we're seeing very steady growth there from now consistently through 2023. The volumes of available technologies are comparatively low right now. We think that, again, tracks the beachhead model of understanding that it'll take a longer period of time for zero-emission technology to meet some of the duty cycles and the distance needs and payload capacities that heavy-duty trucking fleets need to reliably perform their duties. So production development timelines are characteristically longer, and therefore it might take a few more years for this market in heavy-duty trucks, especially on the longer range end of the spectrum, to present themselves and make themselves a fully developed market. I think it's also worth recognizing here that there are several drivers to this growth across the board, from a range of factors, including organic market demand led by corporate players, policy drivers that lead to better environments both for supply and demand, and an increasingly attractive business case, which is more about organic growth. And I think IKEA, who we have speaking next, is able to speak very well to the leadership that can be demonstrated by a corporate fleet. They've been joined by the likes of UPS, FedEx, and Amazon in recent months and years, making significant purchases, investments, or simply commitments to zero-emission commercial vehicles in North America and beyond, with large purchases from the likes of Rivian, Arrival, and Change. Policies can also be a really effective driver to prioritize for manufacturers that they need to target leading jurisdictions that introduce those policies. So examples of those policies can be regulations for progressively greater zero-emission shares of either vehicle production or vehicle procurement. Good examples of those would be the Innovative Clean Transit Rule and the upcoming Advanced Clean Truck Rule in California. We've also seen purchase incentives can be really impactful at helping steer manufacturers to key markets. So examples there would be California's HVIP program, or the New York truck voucher incentive program here on the East Coast. And just to our north, the province of Quebec has an éco-camionnage program that follows much of the same structure in terms of an upfront purchase incentive program. Other influential policies can be things like low carbon fuel standards that allow for accelerated payback periods for zero emission platforms, and also utility programs that allow for accelerated infrastructure preparedness, which we've seen anecdotally can be a very potent determinant of demand for electric commercial vehicles. Now, if we dig in a little bit more specifically on what we're seeing in the bus segments, we find the greatest driving range is going to be offered either now or in the next year or so in the 30 to 40 foot segment, which includes the standard US transit bus size, which is 40 feet. Now with bus, there are many initial stage deployments that have already proven successful. We at CalSTART have tracked more than 2,200 zero emission buses that are either in operation or on order just in the United States alone. And that early success is laying the groundwork for larger scale second and third wave deployments by leading transit agencies like King County Metro in the Seattle area or LA Metro, which have each placed orders for upwards of 100 buses. Here on the East Coast, cities like Philadelphia and New York City are leading the way with orders or fleets more on the order of 25 to 50 zero emission buses. But in the case of New York City, that's leading the way for hundreds more in the next few years. I do want to point out the one kind of outlier on the low end of the range, which you see in the 10 to 20 foot segment. And that's really an autonomous shuttle that's more offered and designed for a campus environment. So that's really just an artifact of its use case and duty cycle. But I do recognize that that can stand out. The other thing I want to acknowledge and observe here is that there's not too much variation in this chart in terms of the colors of these entries, which means by and large that bus models are either already available or they're expected later this year. So what that means is the market is already pretty well constituted. We don't have too much pending model availability for out years. And this again aligns well with our assessment that transit bus is really the logical first success or beachhead application for zero emission technology. The means of production largely are already in place, and you've got a pretty well constituted field of manufacturers. However, as we turn attention to the same graphic for trucks, which in many ways is the next frontier for zero emission technology, it's quite a different story. So right off the bat, you'll notice a much bigger variety, a much larger variety of colors, which means that we have much more pending model availability coming to market for commercial production between now and 2023. We're seeing many options available in each of these segments of truck, ranging from heavy duty all the way down to something lighter like a cargo van, and then something that has a combination of on-road and off-road usage like yard tractors. There are high-profile announcements that we are expecting in the next few years in the top row for heavy-duty trucks, and many of those really follow on the heels of successful deployments in bus technology. So companies like BYD, which we'll hear from in a moment, as well as Volvo, Daimler, and Lion, have all been able to leverage leading zero-emission bus powertrain technology to aid their commercialization for zero-emission truck platforms, which share much of the same core componentry. And what's really exciting about this is that very long-range heavy-duty trucks are expected to be available in the US in the coming years, whether 2022 or 2023, as you can see on the far right end of the range axis. And that represents both fuel cell options, so hydrogen, as well as battery electric. And once those become more viable and cost competitive, we'll really start to see some of that regional haul segment really flourishing. For that reason, the average range here on this chart is highest for heavy duty trucks, which matches their duty cycle. Truck segments with shorter duty cycles, namely medium duty delivery applications, so cargo vans, step vans, box trucks, are comparatively more well developed today. And the announced models are expected really in the very near future as opposed to years like 2022 or 2023. So really here what we're seeing is that there's a wide diversity of offerings coming from a broad range of original equipment manufacturers or OEMs. And that means that this already competitive landscape will continue to grow increasingly so over the next 3 to 4 years. We're going to hear more from BYD in a few moments about what it's like to be in that competitive landscape and what the opportunities are of offering electric vehicle technologies in a range of these segments. But the real upshot here is that manufacturers are seeing a really compelling signal, both from market factors and policy drivers, that fleets want these vehicles and are progressively recognizing the opportunity and value that zero-emission commercial vehicle production can represent. Now, to speak about the market signal and the corporate leadership that a fleet can provide, I'm really thrilled to be joined by Steve Molk, who, as Roxana mentioned, is the Project Implementation Manager for Zero-Emission Home Delivery at IKEA US. Steve, the floor is yours.
Great. Thanks, Ben. Appreciate that. And excited to be here. Yes, IKEA is committed and remains committed to providing zero-emission home deliveries for all of our customers by 2025. That's a global goal. And we're going to start with New York and LA here in the US. So we're super excited about that. And you know, as you said, that there are a number of medium duty, which is typically what we're using today, class 4 and class 5 box trucks is kind of our sweet spot for home delivery. And you know, we believe that that the technology both in the on the vehicle side and on the infrastructure side and software, you know, all of that technology exists today to meet our goals. So we're pressing forward with electrification. You know, hopefully this year, barring any other, you know, delays. So, but I think that home delivery, last mile in particular, lends itself very well for electrification because the distance of the routes tends to be smaller, and the dwell times tend to be longer, and they're taking place, quite frankly, in in urban areas, in densely populated areas where this you know, makes the most sense. So for us, the last mile seems to be a you know, is a very compelling way to show our commitment to sustainable mobility, and we're acting now on these goals. So like you say, I'm sure the technology is going to get better over the next couple of years, but we're confident that with the existing technology and with the existing OEMs that are out there, we're going to be able to pull this off. So our main challenges are really are not the technology. It's really financial. How do we offer lease options and rental options to independent contractor drivers and get them into these vehicles? So I think, you know, there needs to be maybe a little bit more financial innovation there, and the logistics flow needs to adapt for the EV business model as well. So how we flow our goods towards, you know, locations with infrastructure availability and that kind of thing are probably our biggest challenges, more so than the availability of the vehicles. But we're super excited to see that the OEMs are continuing to offer more and more vehicle choices, particularly in that medium duty box truck space. So excited about that.
Thank you, Steve. And I personally find that IKEA's commitment is all the more impressive owing to some of those structural barriers that still need to be worked through. But it's good to hear that less and less model availability is one of those barriers. Right.
No, I think that's right. I mean, it's really and we view all of our problems, I think I've said this to you before, is that, you know, as first adopter problems, and so we're confident that as more people you know, show a demonstrable demand for EV final mile, that the costs will continue to come down, and some of these other structural challenges like financing vehicles and things like this will kind of melt away. So we're happy to be a first adopter, but hopefully more will follow right behind us.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Steve. Now we're going to pivot to the manufacturer perspective. Pleased to be joined today by Aaron Gilmore, Vice President of the Electric Truck Division for BYD Motors. Aaron, over to you.
Thank you, Ben. Appreciate everybody joining us here today. For those of you that haven't heard much about BYD, we're a global manufacturing company, including having manufacturing operations in the United States in Lancaster, California, 500,000 square foot facility there. Our core competencies are in lithium-ion battery technology, consumer electronics, SkyRail, which is an electric monorail technology, and then, of course, EVs, both passenger vehicles and the topic of interest here, which is heavy-duty and medium-duty commercial electric vehicles. BYD's already put over 60,000 electric buses and around 13,000 electric trucks into service worldwide. But the reality is most of that's been outside of North America at this point. The rest of the world is actually ahead of us to some degree in these vehicle deployments, and there's a number of reasons for that. But as you've kind of heard from the folks at CALSTART this morning, we're really on the cusp of change. In the new medium to heavy duty trucks market here in the United States and Canada, the market's roughly 500,000 vehicles or so per year, which is a massive opportunity. And as you've heard about a beachhead strategy, I think BYD looks at that kind of similarly in terms of waves of deployments, waves of new models that make sense in an emerging market that's developing. So far, we've focused in three major areas. The first one is in ports and rail hubs, and that's both because you have on-site opportunities with yard trucks, Class 8 heavy-duty yard trucks that move containers around short distances but are always close to home in terms of charging. With that, you also get a lot of regional drayage opportunities where Class 8 trucks are shuttling containers back and forth to warehouses and customers regionally where the distances aren't so far. And again, you can come back to a home port for charging. One of the other major areas we've been focused on is warehouse logistics and distribution type applications. So those same vehicles I mentioned are applicable there, both Class 8 tractors and Class 8 yard trucks. We also have Class 6 box trucks and refrigeration trucks and straight trucks that are all available and being purchased by customers for services and regional distribution. And then the third category that we've found is really ripe for immediate movement is the refuse industry. And so we have both Class 6 and Class 8 trucks that are picking up and hauling refuse. As Steve mentioned, another great opportunity is last mile delivery. We're actually looking at developing vehicles in this next generation in the sort of step van and sprinter categories, because for the same reasons Steve said, driving in and around short distances, stop and go in local communities really is a great application for electric vehicles. BYD is really confident that the U.S. market's now moving forward and we're making investments that correspond to expand, the models that we offer and the applications that we can serve. In the last few years, we've been able to deploy a number of trucks with lots of different fleets, generally in smaller numbers as demos and pilot scale deployments. But there's been a lot of great feedback from that. The drivers are saying they love the power, they like the ride, there's less noise and vibration, so it's less hard on them during the day. And then, of course, the emissions, no harmful emissions. And when you start to interview folks that are involved either in working around these heavy duty trucks or driving them, I mean, you get drivers that definitely say, I don't want to go back to a diesel ever again. So I think, like Steve said, you know, the will is there, the technology's there. Really, some of the challenges are making sure that the economic models work, that there's policy support. You're always trying to balance range, payload, and cost when you try and put these things together. You know, all these fleets really are operating on a very optimal level, right? They've run algorithms, they've done all kinds of things to optimize their businesses. And so it's really important to get in there and analyze the work cycles with them so that you can figure out, you know, how electric vehicles can work best. On the policy side, I think Ben mentioned a lot of it, but you know, California is definitely leading the way with policies like, you know, the low carbon fuel standards. Washington, New York, I think there's 12 other states that are looking into some form of fuel standard or another. Those are super helpful policies to kind of give vision going forward as to what these fleets can expect in terms of their economic outcomes. And basically, moving fleets it's not an easy task, and it obviously involves a lot of infrastructure upgrades. And I've mentioned a lot of locations or types of applications where you can shuttle back to existing locations for charging. We've mostly deployed, you know, small fleets at this point, but we're on the cusp and talking with a lot of customers about much more significant fleet deployments. And with that comes, you know, a number of other challenges that I think utilities have been moving to be ready to meet those challenges. But a lot of concentrated electrical power is going to be needed in locations in order to make sure the charging can happen. But it's a great opportunity for infrastructure development, for jobs, for just a number of things across the country. I guess kind of to close, I mean, one of the reasons I'm so excited to be in this particular sector is that statistically the emissions from roughly the worst polluting 10% of vehicles contribute to something like over half the carbon emissions and more than 2/3 of the harmful NOx and particulate emissions in the transportation sector. And of course, the 10% of the worst polluting vehicles are the ones that we're really talking about here. It's heavy duty diesel trucks and buses. So the opportunity to have a real impact is here. Like Steve said, the technology is here. BYD has a number of models. We're now actually working into, many people don't know, into our 3rd generation really of vehicles. So the technology is being proven out. It's really now about continuing the policy objectives, aligning things such that the economics work with that combination of range, payload, and cost to where we really get to this inflection point and fleets are able to adopt these types of vehicles in very large numbers over a very short period of time. Anyway, thank you everyone. With that, I'll turn it back over to Roxana.
Thank you so much, Aaron. I really appreciate it. For the journalists on the line, you should have received a press release explaining all of these findings. If you did not, please shoot me an email at roxana.smith@globaldrivetozero.org, or you can also call my cell, which is on the screen right now. It's 510-326-0390. And then if you could take a moment as well today, if you could advance, Ben, to follow us on Twitter at Team Drive to Zero, where you will find program, event, and industry updates on a daily basis. And so now I'd like to open things up for questions. Please jump in with your question. Don't forget to unmute yourself. Please introduce yourself and your outlet and then ask your question. And if there's someone in particular you would like to hear from, please do let us know who you would like to hear from.
Yes, hello. It's John G. Smith of Today's Trucking out of Toronto, Canada. I want to put the question out to the crowd. Given the smaller equipment volumes and sales that are predicted overall in 2020, and they've been adjusted downward quite significantly, can someone offer insights into what that means for the zero emission totals that you're looking at? Is this expected to be a time to gain in market share above what you were looking at, or would you expect, again, smaller totals this year than another year?
So that's a really interesting question. This is Bill Van Amberg. What we are hearing, at least from the fleets that we work with, is that they're keeping their commitments going on the zero emission platforms that they were ordering and the lead times associated. You're right that overall trucking orders, truck orders have gone down. So I don't think in the short term it's so much a market share issue because this is an unusual situation. But I think we're at least pleased to hear that people who are making these commitments to the zero emission platforms are moving ahead and not dropping them during this difficult time. They may be dropping their total truck orders, but they are at least holding on to their zero emission orders. And I think it's that in itself is a strong signal. We've also been really trying to encourage, as we are looking at recovery and stimulus plans at the national levels, at the state levels, and otherwise, to really think about this as a growth strategy for different regions. For instance, China has actually doubled down on those zero emission medium duty and heavy duty categories and extended their incentives beyond when they were going to retire them for the very reason of continuing the stimulation. Europe is doing the same thing with what they call the Green Deal recovery and investing significant dollars as part of their recovery strategy. So that would just be the context that I would put here, is we're seeing people continue forward even in the midst of this downturn with their zero emission orders. And we're really encouraging people to consider this as a really strong part of a recovery and stimulus strategy.
Yeah, I think that's right, Bill. I think it's kind of industry specific as well, because when you look at particularly final mile, deliveries. I mean, there are more deliveries than ever before as everybody shops online, and the e-commerce boom that's been happening for a decade, it seems to have accelerated even more during the crisis. And as people get used to it, they'll probably continue to shop online, right? So, we're continuing to be committed, and we're continuing to show or plan for the same numbers that we were planning for pre-COVID. Maybe that's disrupted in the short term, but in the long term, I think it's only going to grow.
Yeah, just to add to that real quick, I agree with what both Bill and Steve said. I think what we're seeing from some of our fleet customers is obviously there's a lot of economic uncertainty out there, so that causes pause. At the same time, most of our customers are delivering essential services. So even in lockdowns, even in, with all the things that are going on, a number of our customers are still growing, and their services are as needed or more needed than ever. So it really kind of comes down to, the economics. Can you make the economics? Can you make the business case and the work cycle work for them? And like Steve said, I think a lot of the major companies still want to move forward as quickly as possible with these initiatives.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
Thank you. Next question.
I can make a comment, which I think it's the underlying message here of the COVID-19 trends of accelerating e-commerce urban deliveries. And as we see commitments from governments in the US, especially in particular California, in Europe, in China, is that investing in urban delivery electrification can really result in less air pollution, noise, and climate impacts, and at the same time, create new clean technology jobs. So I think that's one of the key messages that we're seeing out there, that despite everything that is happening, the commitments, from manufacturers, from governments, they're still holding true.
I think that's a good point, Cristiano. And I will say, while I don't think we have great specific data yet, what we are kind of the pulse that we've been measuring with the industry and just talking to a number of individual companies, I think this trend towards more online delivery coming out of COVID is only accelerating a trend that's already been there. So we are definitely seeing, at least among people that we're talking to, fleets and others, that they're actually seeing maybe as much as a 50% increase in some of their last mile delivery, or if you will, internet delivery. So this is a huge growth factor. It happens to be then taking place in urban regions, which suffer from the worst impacts of air pollution. This is where diesels are the least efficient and electric drive is the most efficient. And it happens to overlap at an interesting point of time when the models to actually deliver some of these results are starting to actually hit the market, as we found out with the ZETI Analytics. So the timing is a really interesting one with what's going on in the broader industry.
Thanks, Bill. I just wanted to give the journalists on the line another chance if there are any more questions. Please unmute yourself and give us your name and your outlet and your question.
Ben, your briefing was so darn comprehensive. There's no questions.
I don't want to call on Jerry if he doesn't want to speak, but I know that Jerry had a question before the call. Jerry, can you hear me? Do you want to ask your question? Jerry Hirsch. I hope folks are not having trouble unmuting. I'll give it just one more try. And if there are no more questions, then we'll go ahead and say thank you and close. Just one more opportunity for any questions from journalists. Just please unmute yourself and then state your name and your outlet and your question.
So I heard you. This is Jerry, and I'm good. Thank you.
Okay.
Good to hear your voice anyway, Jerry.
Okay, great. That's great. If anyone has any follow-up questions, please do contact me, and I'd be happy to set you up with any of the individuals here on the line. Again, my email, thanks Ben, is roxana.smith@globaldrivetozero.org, or you can call me at 510-326-0390. Thank you again to Steve Molk and Aaron Gilmore for joining us, especially. We really appreciate it. And thank you all, and have a great day.
Thank you, Roxana.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you all.
Thanks.